1 Sources. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. John 20:31. Where can we find a subject more fascinating than the character of Jesus? It captivates every person who has even a slight desire to advance in knowledge or who has a small ability to understand things that have deep and lasting importance. Simply as a biography, this is an amazing story with an exciting life and a tragic death. Whether someone is a Christian or not, unless completely closed-minded, they must take an interest in Jesus' life. Even a person of intellect cannot remain unaffected by the death of Socrates. The prison where he died is an important historical place. As long as people have the ability to think and feel compassion, they will stand in awe of the old Greek philosopher as he drinks the fatal cup. However, the death of Jesus is even more tragic than the death of Socrates. Who isn't interested in the death of Julius Caesar? When will Mark Antony's speech stop stirring our emotions? As long as people are human, they will be amazed by the great tragedy that took place in the Roman capital. But the death of Jesus is even more tragic than the death of Caesar. Furthermore, Jesus of Nazareth is the starting point of countless influences. The whole world of the past 2,000 years becomes incomprehensible unless one knows something about him. How can you understand the great art galleries filled with paintings of his face, his mother, and his disciples, unless you know who he was, what he said, and what he accomplished? Step out of the art galleries into the libraries, and how will you understand the great history books unless you are familiar with his life, for his name is mentioned in every book? Step out of the world of books into the world of people and things. Walk along the streets, and how will you explain St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, along with all the churches and missions scattered across this land, unless you know something about the man who inspired them and whose name they bear? We have a subject that should be of interest to every person. But as soon as we delve into the careful study of Jesus' life, we encounter a series of surprises. The first surprise is that the biography of this man is limited to such a small amount of information. If you want to study the life of Abraham Lincoln, you have to consult many books. The life of George Washington cannot be easily condensed into one book. Hundreds of books have been written about Napoleon, Frederick the Great, and Caesar, but the biography of Jesus can be found in just one small book that can be bought for a low price and carried in your pocket. This is surprising, considering that there were many Greek writers living during Jesus' time, yet none of them wrote his biography, as far as scholars know. Not a single Greek poet or historian left any writings about Jesus. There were also many Roman writers living in Palestine when Jesus preached, writing about various individuals and topics, but none of them seemed interested in sketching the life of Jesus. There were even Jewish writers living at that time, but none of them bothered to write the story of Jesus' life. This is remarkable. There may be apocryphal Gospels, Acts, Epistles, and Apocalypses, but none of them, individually or collectively, shed any new light on Jesus' character that isn't already found in our New Testament. Everything that is definitively known about Jesus of Nazareth can be found within the pages of the New Testament. For years, scholars have been searching through libraries, excavating ancient cities, and digging into desert sands in the hopes of finding new information about this man. One time, 2 Englishmen found 2 papyrus leaves, one of them torn in 2, while digging in the sands of Middle Egypt. Christian scholars around the world were excited, thinking that this new discovery might provide some new insights into Jesus' life. Unfortunately, the new papyrus didn't reveal anything new. The complete story can only be found within the limited confines of the New Testament. However, we can narrow it down even further. You can construct a life of Jesus from the book of Acts, but it is quite limited and contains practically nothing that isn't already mentioned in the Gospels. You can also piece together a life of Jesus from the New Testament epistles, but this biography is incomplete and doesn't add anything significant to what is already told in the Gospels. Therefore, for our current purpose, we can disregard all the other books of the New Testament and affirm that everything known about the character of Jesus can be found in the Gospels. That the life of the greatest and most important man who ever lived upon the earth should be written on pages so small and few is one of the surprises. When we study the Gospels, we are surprised again by how little information they give us about Jesus' life. We don't know exactly how long Jesus lived, but it seems like he lived around 33 years based on hints. The Gospels only mention a few days out of those 33 years. The authors of the Gospels didn't try to cover most of Jesus' life. They focused on a small portion. They also didn't cover all 3 years of his public ministry, only mentioning a few days. So if Jesus lived 33 years and the Gospels only cover about 35 days, they only tell us about a small fraction of his life. The Gospels contain many of Jesus' teachings, but they can be spoken in about 5 hours. They also mention many of the things he did, but they could have happened in just one day. It's clear that we don't have as much information as we would like. The question is, do we have enough information? There is often a gap between what we want and what we actually need, so it's not surprising that there is a gap here. These Gospels only focus on Jesus' words. They don't describe his facial expressions, gestures, or voice. We can't see his smile or frown, which could reveal a lot about him. Gestures are also important in understanding someone's thoughts, but the Gospels don't mention them. We also don't have recordings of Jesus' voice, which is a powerful way of communicating. The way words are spoken can add meaning and emotion. We are also denied access to Jesus' sighs and tears, which could give us deeper insight into his heart. All we have are words, which can sometimes be unclear and not fully capture someone's emotions. Another surprising fact is that we don't even have Jesus' actual words. He spoke in Aramaic, but there are only a few Aramaic words recorded in the Gospels. The rest of the words we read in the English New Testament are translations chosen by scholars. Even the Greek words in the original text were chosen to interpret the meaning of the Aramaic words. It's possible that there were Aramaic Gospels before the Greek ones, but they have been lost over time. The earliest copies of the Greek Gospels were written on fragile papyrus, which likely deteriorated within 100 years. The oldest copies of the New Testament we have date back to the 4th century, which is also surprising. So, when we look at these words that we have to talk about, will they tell us anything about how the Nazarene looked? No, they won't. The people who wrote the Gospels weren't interested in Jesus' height, eye or hair color, facial expression, or body build. People have looked closely at the New Testament, hoping to find some clue about Jesus' appearance, but no such clue has been found. Some phrases here and there have been examined and analyzed, trying to force them to give even a hint about what Jesus looked like. However, even under intense scrutiny, the Gospels remain completely silent on this interesting question. Therefore, we need to get rid of any mental pictures of Jesus. We simply don't know what he looked like. Artists haven't known either. They have just painted based on their imagination. When an Italian artist paints Jesus, they add a little bit of their own culture into it. The same goes for German and Spanish artists. That's why there are different depictions of the Virgin Mary. Raphael paints her as a beautiful Italian girl, Murillo paints her as an innocent Spanish maiden, and Sichel paints her as a German peasant girl. No artist can completely overcome their own cultural preferences. So the artists have simply painted their own ideal image of Jesus, which is a creation of their imagination. You and I have the right to do the same. If you want to imagine Jesus as he appeared in the past, you can create that image based on your own ideal. You have the same right as the artists. Remember that we are not here to study Jesus' appearance, but rather his character. Now, even though we have lost all the details of Jesus' facial expressions, tone of voice, glances, and gestures, we shouldn't think that these things were unimportant in history. All these things made an impression on the people who were closest to Jesus. They saw him smile, noticed the look in his eyes, heard him laugh, sigh, and cry, and were captivated by the sound of his voice. The question is, how did these experiences affect them? According to the New Testament, they were affected in 2 different and opposite ways. Some people were repelled by Jesus. They didn't like him, feared him, hated him, and detested him. Their hatred became so intense that they even killed him. They couldn't stand the thought of him staying on this earth. That was the impact he had on one group of people. On the other hand, there were people who were attracted to Jesus. They liked him, loved him, idolized him, and were willing to die for him. It's important to remember that every one of his disciples, except for one, sacrificed their lives for Jesus, even after he died. The people who were closest to him loved him with an immeasurable adoration, and they conveyed this impression to others. This impression has continued to this day, so that even in the 21st century, thousands of miles away from Palestine, people are building churches in the name of Jesus, believing that his name is superior to all others, and that everyone should bow before him. So right at the beginning of our study about Jesus' character, let's remember that Christianity is based on a real life that was lived on this earth. There is one part of the Christian belief that everyone can agree with, without question or doubt. There are people who might refuse to believe in the first part of the traditional creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Some may not acknowledge the existence of a spiritual being like God. Others might have difficulty accepting the last part of the belief, I believe in the life everlasting. That idea goes beyond what we can see, and some people only believe in what they can physically observe. However, at the very core of the belief, there is one sentence that no one can reasonably object to. Suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. Some people object to supernatural things. They prefer the ordinary. That's fine. They can start with the natural. Some of you may think that Christianity is something intangible, floating in the air. While it's true that its influence is widespread, its origins are firmly grounded in human history. Its foundation is not in philosophy or poetry, but in real-life experiences. Everything we see of Christianity in the world today came from this man who lived in Palestine, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. Can I ask you for one thing? While you read what I say, I recommend reading Mark's Gospel from the very beginning to the end. It's believed to be the oldest Gospel, the shortest one, and the most vivid one. It seems to give us the closest glimpse of Jesus as he was seen during his difficult times. If you read this Gospel, it will be easier for you to understand what I'm talking about and get to know the most important figure in history better. It's a mistake for anyone to leave religious matters solely to the minister. If someone who is Roman Catholic relies entirely on the priest, they won't grow spiritually or gain a deeper understanding of Jesus Christ our Lord. Likewise, a Protestant who only goes to church and listens to the preacher without making an effort to study the important texts that contain the words of God is wasting opportunities. They won't develop strong beliefs or lasting knowledge that could make them influential and beneficial in their time. In other words, I can't study the character of Jesus on your behalf. You have to do it yourself. All I can do is offer suggestions that might help you in your study.